Caring without being cared for is exhausting, because it places you in a relationship where your heart is always active, but your needs are always postponed. You wake up thinking about them, go through your day with them in the back of your mind, and fall asleep replaying moments that meant more to you than they probably realize. You invest emotionally without knowing where you stand, and that uncertainty quietly eats away at your peace. You're not tired because you love too much, you're tired because you love without stability, without clarity, without being chosen in the same way you choose them. At the beginning, it doesn't feel draining at all. It feels exciting, meaningful. You feel special because the connection feels intense. Private, you tell yourself that not everything needs a label, that some bonds are deeper than words. You convince yourself that commitment will come naturally, that if you keep showing up, if you stay patient, if you remain understanding, they'll eventually meet you where you are. But while you're growing more attached, they stay comfortably undecided, and slowly, what felt like love starts to feel like emotional labor. You begin to notice that you're always the one adjusting. You wait for their replies, excuse their absence, forgive their inconsistency, and soften your needs so they don't feel pressured. You learn how to love them in a way that doesn't inconvenience them, even if it costs you. You stop asking for clarity because you're afraid it will push them away. You stop expressing hurt because you don't want to seem needy. You tell yourself you're being mature, but in reality, you're being emotionally self-abandoning. Living in the gray zone is one of the most psychologically draining places a person can be. You're not single enough to feel free, and not committed enough to feel secure. You exist in emotional limbo, constantly hoping the next conversation will change things. Every small sign of affection feels like progress, and every moment of distance feels like a setback. Your emotional state becomes dependent on their behavior, and without realizing it, you hand over your inner peace to someone who hasn't promised to protect it. What hurts the most is that they often do care, just not enough to choose you fully. They share their thoughts, their fears, their vulnerabilities. They trust you emotionally, but stop short of responsibility. They want the comfort of connection without the weight of commitment. And you, caring deeply, accept crumbs because you're starving for reassurance. You tell yourself it's better than nothing, but over time better than nothing starts feeling like not enough. This kind of bond slowly changes how you see yourself. You start questioning your worth. You wonder why you're not enough to be chosen clearly. You compare yourself to imaginary alternatives. You overthink everything you say, everything you feel. You become hyper-aware of shifts in energy, tone, timing. Your nervous system stays in a constant state of alert, and that constant emotional vigilance is exhausting in ways people rarely talk about. You might even start romanticizing the struggle. You tell yourself that love is supposed to be hard, that real connections take patience, that deep bonds require endurance. But love isn't supposed to feel like a test you're constantly failing. It isn't meant to make you smaller, quieter, or less expressive. When love is healthy, it soothes you. When it isn't, it drains. You and no amount of depth can compensate for the absence of commitment. There's also grief in this kind of caring. Not the kind that comes from losing someone, but the kind that comes from never fully having them. You grieve the version of the relationship you hoped for. You grieve the future you imagined. You grieve the energy you poured in that was never matched. And because nothing officially ended, you don't feel allowed to mourn it. So the pain stays stuck inside you, unresolved and heavy. Over time, exhaustion turns into emotional numbness. You still care, but you're tired of feeling. You still love, but you're afraid of hoping. You begin pulling back parts of yourself without fully letting go. You exist halfway, half attached, half guarded. And that in-between state is incredibly draining because it requires constant emotional management. You're always monitoring how close is too close, how distant is too distant, how much is safe to give. The truth is caring deeply without commitment asks you to pour from a cup that's never refilled. You give reassurance without receiving it. You offer consistency while accepting inconsistency. You show loyalty without knowing if it's mutual. And no matter how strong you are, no one can sustain that forever without losing something inside themselves. At some point, a quiet realization begins to form. You start noticing how much emotional energy this bond consumes. How often you feel anxious instead of calm. How often you feel uncertain instead of secure. You begin to see that love shouldn't feel like you're constantly waiting for permission to matter. And that realization doesn't come with anger, it comes with sadness and clarity. You understand then that your depth isn't the problem. Your capacity to care isn't a flaw. The problem is that you placed your heart in a space that couldn't hold it properly, and staying doesn't make you more loving it, just makes you more tired. Loyalty to confusion is not strength. Endurance in emotional neglect is not devotion. Choosing yourself in this moment feels terrifying because caring deeply means you've built emotional roots. Letting go feels like losing a part of yourself, but what you're actually doing is reclaiming the parts of you that were slowly fading. You're choosing rest over restlessness, clarity over confusion, peace over potential. And maybe that's the hardest lesson. Not every deep bond is meant to be permanent. Some connections come into our lives to show us how deeply we can feel, but also to teach us where we must draw the line. Caring deeply is beautiful, but it deserves reciprocity. It deserves commitment. It deserves someone who doesn't leave you guessing. If this message resonates, it's because you've been giving from a place of love while surviving in a place of uncertainty. And recognizing that isn't weakness, it's awareness. You're not broken for feeling drained. You're human, and you deserve a connection where caring deeply doesn't cost you your peace, your self-worth, or your emotional safety. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop pouring into what drains you and save that depth for something that can finally give back.